Good evening. Welcome to what is the Friday evening update on Hurricane Isaias here. This is what has been a quickly changing situation here throughout the day. This has definitely become a lot better organized over the past 12 hours since this morning when the lower level circulation became exposed, and this hurricane is now much better defined on both radar and satellite imagery. You can clearly see very deep clouds that are or convection that is rotating around the hurricane's now completed eye, according to Recon. If you look at radar imagery here, you can see the hurricane has a closed off eye wall here and is trying to beef up its western side. There are a couple areas that it needs to improve upon before it becomes, a really mature hurricane here. You need a well-defined ring of convection that is very deep reds on the radar here for this to become a mature hurricane and be able to really intensify quickly here. This eye needs to be stable and not be affected too much by external forces here. If you look at a couple things on radar, you can see these bands that are developing to the south and east of the hurricane. This is because the storm has moved away from the island of Hispaniola. If you look back to the true color loop here, you can see that it was originally drawing from, earlier on today, it was drawing from the mountains, and so there was some dry air that got intermixed into the circulation and temporarily destroyed the convection that was around the hurricane's core. And now that is sufficiently far away from the islands, it is now able to draw upon moisture that is from the very warm waters that are just off to the south and east of the hurricane. We're going to look at water vapor imagery here and see what the overall flow is here. You can see that the storm's outflow is beginning to expand back out to the west due to how powerful this convection has been. These are extremely cold cloud tops in here that have been firing around the eye wall here, trying to really bolster this eye wall and make sure that it is very intense here. As this continues, this actually is pressing upon what is a trough that has moved sufficiently far enough back here. You can see these clouds that are being sheared off to the west and then back off to the east in Florida, which indicates the trough axis that is somewhere in here. And this has been pushed back a lot further than what models originally had thought at this point. And a lot of features in the upper levels have apparently changed according to what the upper level reconnaissance has been sampling today. If you look at the dropsondes that the upper level recon has found, and we're going to look at one right here in a minute, but you can see they've been sampling all day this mid-level ridge that is currently to the north of the hurricane, and it seems that they are heading towards the trough that is supposed to be immediately to the west of the hurricane, but that is no longer the case according to water vapor imagery, which we can see here. The trough axis is further off to the west. What does this mean? Well, this means that the mid-level shear vector here is not actually out of the southwest and more perpendicular to the hurricane's track, because the hurricane is heading up to the northwest, and if you had, southwesterly shear, this is going to obviously impact the inner core structure. As told by this is clearly not happening. The hurricane has been able to sufficiently organize an inner core because the shear vector is a little different than what actually was supposed to happen. And so the mid-level shear is more in line, not exactly in line, so there's still shear in here, but the shear is more in line with the hurricane and is not actually hurting the hurricane's track as much, or is not hurting the hurricane's intensity as much as expected. And so this storm has been able to organize in the face of the shear that has not been as strong as originally forecast. So this is much stronger than what models forecasted at this time. And the reason I'm not going to show you the A-Team-Z model suite is because they do not have the upper level reconnaissance data in here. The A-Team-Z model suite, however, has been trending further to the west, but that will change come 0Z when those are released. I'm going to do another update in the morning as this comes up through New Providence Island here and Andros Island here, and is in this general vicinity within the range of these islands, and we're going to be watching the final approach here. I'll have another update in the evening of Saturday as this is approaching the Florida East Coast. So if we look at the current recon mission here, they're going in for another pass right now. You can see a couple things here. You have first a well-defined wind maximum here. They found 70 knots in the northwestern eye wall, and they found 988 millibar pressure in the eye of the hurricane, which means that the hurricane has been deepening some today as this has become better organized here. And you can also see, if you look, you can see that the wind field to the northeast is pretty large in here. And so that means that the tropical storm force winds that are expected to affect these areas. You can see the hurricane force wind barbs, but those are being sampled as just tropical storm force winds here to the north, so do not get concerned about this. This is due to what the overall envelope that the hurricane was embedded in. You have this fetch of trade winds that is just to the north of the hurricane that has been amplified by the pressure gradient that the hurricane has presented. So you have, what looks like isobars here, and you have a ridge or a lower level ridge that is enhancing this 850 millibar flow that is off to the west. And so these winds do not translate all the way down. These are not, as I said, these are not hurricane force winds at the surface. However, they are still tropical storm force winds, and so that does create a larger wind field for the storm to produce storm surge, even though the inner core, as you can see, is pretty small. So, as this continues on towards the coast, let's look at the National Hurricane Center track forecast here. You can see this moves off to the northwest and begins to bend a little bit more to the north-northwest come Sunday morning here, and then you have the hurricane eventually bends off to the northeast with time. And this is due, if you look back at the water vapor imagery, you can tell the edge of your screen here, there's a trough that is entering the view. And this will overtake whatever is left of the PV streamer here that was shearing the storm, which kind of failed. This will begin to overtake the overall steering flow that the hurricane is within. And so when that happens and how fast this trough moves will ultimately determine when this turn to the north happens. And so it's less and less about how strong the storm is now, and it's more and more about, when this trough comes in, because this mid-level ridge that is steering the hurricane off to the west here is going to continue to round this ridge and move up through this region. And, the problem with this track is that, the storm is very small. The inner core, at least, is very small. Everyone is going to be getting tropical storm force winds at the least, because the tropical storm force wind field extends very far away from the overall center of the storm. So you will at least be getting gale force winds here. You can see there are even tropical storm force or tropical storm warnings here for the Lake Okeechobee area and further south in the Miami and Homestead area here, which is still in the cone, which may mean that hurricane warnings do get issued later. And there are hurricane watches for the Miami downtown area here, so do be watching that if you are in Miami. But again, any slight deviation in the track here, so you have the forecast track here around 2 p.m. Saturday. You see that, there's a little bit of the cone here, essentially. If you have a slight deviation in the track, that could leave the hurricane's core offshore here, or it could bring it onshore sooner. Either of these would drastically change the impacts for the hurricane warned area. Bahamas, you're getting hurricane conditions regardless. However, the approach angle of this hurricane is very difficult to exactly pin down who exactly is going to get the effects, because, if it deviates, 25 miles off to the east, then no one gets hurricane conditions. Or if it deviates 25 miles to the west, then, this is pretty much directly on the coast. This is similar to Hurricane Matthew and what we were dealing with the hurricane coming up the entire Florida East Coast here. And you had this stretch of coast that was either going to get missed by the hurricane or was going to take a direct hit. There was some kind of an average in here as the inner eye wall stayed offshore here, but the outer eye wall was close enough to where it affected some areas, specifically the Cape, the Space Coast, and the Fort Lauderdale area. But, so you're going to need to be watching this very closely. Any slight deviation in the track could mean, the difference between getting the core of a strengthening hurricane in here. This will be strengthening upon approach as the storm will continue towards the northwest. This is not going to be halted too much by anything. The theory of dry air getting into the mix of the hurricane is not really happening, and so this will be strengthening upon approach. How fast this is going to be strengthening, let's say for now that this is likely to be just steadily strengthening all the way up until landfall. This is not going to strengthen rapidly here. There is a shot at that, but that is less than 20% right now according to the ship's intensity forecast. But what you should be expecting here, you should be preparing for what is a Category 2 hurricane here upon approach. This is not the actual intensity forecast from the National Hurricane Center, but they are forecasting the intensity forecast for when it was a less organized 75-mile-per-hour hurricane here that was a little further to the south and east and was not as organized now. I think they're going to update this intensity forecast a little bit because now it is already almost at what the peak intensity was forecast for the 2 p.m. advisory here. So this is definitely going to change, and do be expecting evacuation orders and maybe you need to be preparing regardless of whether or not you are staying. This is going to be a nasty hurricane here. If you look at the peak surge graphic here, you can see that the size of the storm's tropical storm force wind field does actually enhance the surge here a little bit because of how large the wind field is. If you go back to the National Hurricane Center graphic, you can see this will all be pushing onshore flow here onto the majority of the Florida East Coast. And so you can see that the peak surge of the hurricane is 2 to 4 feet here. So this is not terrible, but you can expect water rises in here that are pretty substantial, and you do not want to be out in these waters regardless. You want to be in a sturdy structure as this hurricane comes up the coast. Well, that is all. I'm going to be back with an update tomorrow morning on this hurricane as this comes up, and please refer to the National Hurricane Center, your local National Weather Service office, and your local officials for all the information regarding your area as the storm comes up the Florida East Coast. Be very careful and stay safe here. I know there's coronavirus in Florida. That has been pretty bad. You need to be very, very careful as the storm comes ashore. And thank you for watching. I hope you guys stay safe.